First and foremost, I appreciate BCIS for honoring late Jayantha Dhanapala and Ambassador Palihakkara. Both of them have done certainly rendered human service to the government in implementing, in formulating and implementing its international relations, and therefore is deserving of it. Unfortunately, Jayantha Dhanapala passed away short time ago, but I remember him when I first became the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in 1977, and he was one of those who advised Minister Hamid on the issues of the non-aligned movement. Ambassador Palihakkara is our later vintage, though had to play a more active role as Sri Lanka had to face a number of issues since when the war progressed towards the early part of this century as it neared its end in 2009, though he had retired by then. Nevertheless, since I am here, I thought I'll say a few words on what the thinking of the government in this regard to foreign policy. Our golden age may have been from the time of Mr. D.S. Sennayaka on to the time of Sir John Kothalavala and then to Mrs. Bandaranayaka, where we played an active role in the international scene. Then we were beginning from about mid-1980s. Sri Lanka's diplomacy was one that entertained with the war itself, the conduct of the war, the pressures we had from outside. And at the very end, after 2009, our focus for a long time was on Geneva and human rights. But the world won't stand in one place. Certainly, the world will not be able only to accommodate the policies that we want. Now we are in the post-COVID age, which I would call the geopolitics of the global polycrisis. Because today, since the post-COVID age, we have seen a number of with the crisis. First has been COVID itself, which sparked off the debt crisis. And that added on to the already delayed implementation of the SDG goals. And that again has also come in with the Paris Climate Pact targets, which have still to be achieved. The whole question of mitigation of climate change. So you have that on one side. Then the question of trade is the other issue that we have. Finally, through this, we have the main issues of the US-China rivalry, which goes through both the heightened tensions with China, the Ukraine war, and now the Gaza war. It's in this it's in the background that we have to formulate our foreign policy. And another thread that goes through all these issues is the growing disenchantment of the South with the North, the developed North. So these are the issues in which we have to function, in which we have to form policy. It's quite different from a Cold War. It's a number of Cold Wars and a few hot wars going together. And how do we control it? One of the issues that I have noticed is basically a change of US policy. From the time of Richard Nixon to Barack Obama, the policy, certainly there was a continuity in its policies. Whether it be Kissinger or Showcroft, or whoever was there was certainly continuity in US policies. We could understand that. Then came President Trump. Well, there was continuity in his policies. He disrupted some, but there was continuity in the others. And you could be sure that he could not start off a war. But listening to the present policy statements, which I myself sometimes question, the views which have been expressed very forcefully, firstly by the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, it seems to be based on a Carnegie study which was done in 2020 on the thinking of the American voters in Nebraska, Ohio, and one or two other states. It's basically, as they call, foreign policy for the American middle class. Now I can't see how you can have a foreign policy for one part of a country and not for the other part. Or one agree, you can't have it for the working class or the middle class. But that's the view, and then it caters to it. No more open trade, let's cut that back. The Inflation Reduction Act was actually subsidies for American industries at the expense of both China and EU. So you could see actually a rolling back of the economic framework and the trade framework that we have been used to. It's not merely an issue of removing investments from China, or what's called decoupling or sometimes de-risking, but that it's a completely new approach that has been taken, which has also led to the escalation of the tension between China and US. This view was also repeated again in the Brookings statement by Jake Sullivan, and parts of it was also included in the G7 communique. So that's one issue that we have. Secondly is the Chinese policy of now asserting itself and making its claims. Part of it you can understand because China, the second largest economy in the world, and China feels, like many other Asian countries, that they have not been given its due place. But in this background that we have to function. And then you have different groupings. First is the coming together of Russia and China. The earlier American policy was to keep Russia and China divided and ensure both those countries had better relations with US than with each other. Now you've gone back on it, and you've got China and Russia having good relations and at the expense of US. That's another feature at the present times. And the emergence of two blocs. One is the NATO, which has again come together during the Ukraine war, but again within NATO, the smaller countries, and in Europe, EU itself, the smaller Eastern and the Southern European nations have been given leadership by America at the expense of the policies followed by the larger members of the EU and NATO. Britain's role itself has diminished because he had left the EU. But on the other hand, you find a firmer bloc in the Quad itself, which certainly showed in the vote in the UN on the ceasefire, while the NATO was divided, the Quad was all united in how they voted. And China itself is now moving and strengthening its relations with Africa and even with America. So within this, how do we survive? That is the first issue. What do we do? So what is our policy? Firstly, it is also a result of the economic power moving from the West towards Asia. It started, funnily enough, in East Asia, but now it's coming to South Asia and the Indian Ocean, then going on to Africa. So within it, firstly is the Indo-Pacific, a new concept. On this, we have taken the same line as the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, that we are two interconnected oceans. We are not one space. We are two interconnected oceans, and each one has its own character. This is why it's important, because Asia-Pacific has what is called the hub and spoke system of the US plus China. But we are not so. The Bandung Conference and subsequently the IOPZ resolution, which was presented by Mrs. Bandaranaike, has laid down the principles which was again confirmed at the Jakarta Concord of the IORA leaders in 2017. So let us work within it. Let us work on the basis that there should be no big power rivalry in the Indian Ocean. Secondly, we have to look at economics. Foreign affairs is not merely political relations. So we have to find our markets, we have to find our economic ties. South SAARC as a concept is dead. I mean, someone has forgotten to tell SAARC that it's dead, but the fact is it's no longer functional. What do we find? I think we have to move further down. We have BIMSTEC, which is still coming together as a group. The other option available for us was to join RCEP. So the government of Sri Lanka applied to join the RCEP, which will give us a big market, the biggest market. It's not as tight as the comprehensive and the progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, but nevertheless, I think it's the best economic bloc that Sri Lanka can join. At the same time, we are negotiating with India on a separate treaty which will certainly upgrade the present free trade agreement, and we will go into a comprehensive economic and technological partnership. The Indian government has recommended that we separate trade from investments. I think that's good. So we will go along that track. So we have India, we have RCEP, we have now got to further deepen our relations with EU and expand our relationships there. So what Sri Lanka is now moving is one is to develop our economic relations with all the countries in Asia and look at Europe and look at Africa as a potential market later on. But as far as the political direction is concerned, that we treat the Indian Ocean as being free from big power rivalry. We should not allow big power rivalry to take place there. That Sri Lanka has been expressing at every international fora. We ourselves seems to be becoming caught in the America-China rivalry. Hambantota is being labeled as a Chinese port, as the government at times are supposed to be helping China. So that's how it works. We all know what the actual situation is. But that rivalry is also not good for our region. It's a rivalry we can do without. Far as we are concerned, we don't look at US as one option and China as another option. We take on the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. The Chinese government prefers to stay on to the Asia-Pacific concept. We have no problem with it, not at all. Because in any case, the BRI is really interconnection of the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. If otherwise, the Chinese ships came from Pacific Ocean through Malacca Straits to the Indian Ocean. So in fact, we have still got interconnectivity between the two. But I think the Indian Ocean should be big enough to accommodate Indo-Pacific, to accommodate BRI, to accommodate the France's views on the Indo-Pacific. So we should be big enough to accommodate any of those. And certainly, India anyway has Saga and its other concepts. So we have to use the Indian Ocean as not being reserved for one group or one set of nations, but open to all. We will strive to do that. And for that purpose, we will also certainly go ahead with the proposal for the freedom of navigation and overhead certainly and undersea cables in the Indian Ocean. We will go ahead with that. With India and Maldives, trilateral security dialogue, we will deal with the issues of non-state actors in the region, especially those who are involved in the drugs trade. So that is Sri Lanka's view. But we come to the next issue. As between the North and the South, in regard to climate change and debt relief, it's our view that there should be a debt write-off for all the low-income countries, especially in Africa. Africa cannot carry this burden, and we have to ensure that Africa is relieved of this burden. So therefore, we have taken a firm stand that there should be a write-off of the debt in respect of all low-income countries. As far as the middle-income countries, there should be a window for concessional lending. Sri Lanka has made it out. We have got the letter from the Chinese Exim Bank also today. So we are on our way of certainly leaving our status of bankruptcy behind us. But other countries may not find it that easy. We have to help them. The next issue is the one connected to it, is the question of loss and damage. What is the loss and damage going to be? Now the view of northern developed countries are that loss and damage should be limited to the island states. That will disappear. I don't think that's going to work. There are other countries that need help and they have to be helped. You can be selective. I don't think we can expect developed economies to be bailing everyone out, but you can be selective and look at the plans that are now being put forward. Sri Lanka, in this regard, is now studying a proposal on the tropical belt, the most diverse areas in the world. If you focus on the tropical belt and to help climate mitigation, that will also have positive impacts on the other two areas. So we will be pressing this and we'll be going with the south on the issues of loss and damage. Again, I must refer to the fact that the Paris summit we had on global financing is also trying to resolve these issues. It's a good place where the developed and the developing countries all meet. The next one is of trade. Now that we cannot have the global trading system broken up. If they want restrictions on trade for security purposes, yes, you can have that. But you can't have all the supply chains being upended because America and China are having a rivalry. You cannot upset the global trading order. If there has to be changes, all of us has to be consulted. One country, a group of countries can't decide it. All of us have to be consulted and there must be the consent of the majority of the countries. So these are the policies that we intend to follow as the situation develops. But I feel as far as the Ukraine-Russian war is concerned, it's at a stalemate. I don't think, certainly there are no signs of Ukraine being able to win it. Russia can retreat, but Russia is not on its own territory. They are fighting on Ukraine's territory. So Russia is holding firm, but even if they retreat, they are still on someone else's territory. And the Ukraine armed forces has not made that gain. And the corruption levels in the Ukrainian armed forces are such that the president had to sack the minister and all his state deputy ministers. So we can't see it's much better. And sometime next year, you will have to go for talks as far as the Russian-Ukrainian war is concerned. My worry is about the Gaza war. The Israeli aim is to destroy the Hamas leadership. Let's say they destroy the Hamas leadership that's now in Gaza. That's not the end of it. You will get the next generation of Hamas. Half the Arab world is with the Hamas. And that will be worse than this. And what impact it will have in our part of the world, we don't know. It's a serious issue. You can't destroy the Hamas. You can destroy this leadership. You can destroy everyone who was in the Hamas, not only the fighters, but even the members. But still the next generation of Hamas has already been born. Basically, what is happening? The whole Gaza war is brought into your living room by Al Jazeera. And you just should know best, because the Tet war in Vietnam, the Tet campaign was brought into the American living rooms by the American TV, and the whole attitude of America to the war changed. And that is what is happening. So this is what we have to look out, and we have to ensure there's ceasefire, and we can ensure that the situation will gradually or very slowly come back to a normal situation. But this has also, in a way, will have an impact on the relations that US was trying to foster between Israel and the Arab countries. So this is really the big question to watch, not the Ukraine war. It can't go on for long. What is the silver lining in this? That is that President Biden and President Xi are meeting in San Francisco for the APEC meeting. Let's hope that there will be a positive outcome. A positive outcome is needed if you have to go ahead. Either situation will become worse. So I don't want to take any more of your time. I just thought I will mention the thinking of the government in regard to foreign policy and what's taking on the global developments. And we'll have to find a way, all of us together, how we steer our way through the geopolitics of the global polycrisis, which will not go away. Thank you.